All right. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Capital Clarity of the 2026 legislative session. I'm Jake Wyman, Communications Director for the Idaho Freedom Foundation. Following up on last year's Legislature 101, which covered the general legislative process, today we're diving into Legislature 201. This is our crash course on the fundamentals of state budgeting and an overview of our freedom and spending indexes. With a massive deficit looming and elections on the horizon, it is more important now than ever for you to understand the ins and outs of how lawmakers spend your tax dollars. We cannot afford to continue down this path of reckless spending. It's up to all of us to ensure our representatives are truly working in our best interests. To lead today's discussion, we have a longtime expert, our president, Ron Nate. Ron holds a PhD in economics and is a former economics professor at BYU. So if anyone knows budgets, it's him. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome IFF President Ron Nate.
Thank you, Jake. And I would like to thank him for the setup here and for Josh Turnbow and his team for doing some video support for us, and for other members of our team here too. Sarah and Rebecca are here in the room. It's been a busy first week here at the legislature. It started on Monday with the House and Senate gaveling in, and then they invited the governor to come and give his annual State of the State address. And I don't know how many of you got to see that. Let's see, raise your hands. How many people got to see the State of the State address? Okay, 30%-ish. All right. He outlined what his plans are for this year for the legislative session. And as usual, the State of the State address includes his discussion about the budget and what the budget plans are for the coming year. I don't know if you know this, but the budget is in a bit of a pickle this year. That the tax collections compared to the spending going on shows that projections have us ending up upside down at the end of the year, meaning that spending is exceeding tax collections by some estimates, close to $100 million. And if other things happen like tax conformity with the big beautiful bill, it could be hundreds of millions of dollars that Idaho ends up short if nothing is done. Now, that might be a surprise to some of you. It might be a surprise to a lot of legislators, but it's not a surprise to us at the Idaho Freedom Foundation. We have been predicting for years that the state legislature is exceeding its capabilities in terms of spending. During the COVID years, the Idaho legislature relied far too much on federal spending. When I was actually in the legislature at the time, and we committed to voting for a bill that said, you know what, we recognize this is one-time spending, and we're not going to commit our kids and grandkids to relying on federal dollars for years and decades to come. But here we are. Here we are. The spending exceeds the ability to pay for it, and adjustments need to be made. So that is to lay the groundwork for why we wanted to talk about Legislature 201 today. Legislature 101 is about individuals getting involved in the government process, getting involved in the legislative process, understanding what a bill is, how it originates, how it moves through the Capitol, and when and where and how you can contact your legislators, give testimony on bills, and be as effective as possible in trying to stop bad legislation, promote good legislation, and have your legislators hear from you. Were any of you here last year for Legislature 101? All right, so you have passed the class. Now you're here at Legislature 201. 2 more years, and then you'll have a degree in legislature. And but Legislature 201, now I know budgets don't sound like an exciting topic. I'm an economist. They're exciting for me. Our policy team, they love looking at budgets. In fact, I was thinking about it today. We have Fred Birnbaum, who's been with us for over a decade. We have Brett Ferrugia, who's our budget analyst, and he's a PhD candidate from Hillsdale. Our 2 other policy experts are PhD candidates, one from Hillsdale, the other one from Liberty University. And I was thinking, we have a lot of legislative and budget experience. In fact, more than your average legislator. So we hope to continue our presence in the Capitol and continue our influence But more importantly, they're not going to listen to us as much as listening to the people. And so helping you understand the legislative and especially the budget process tonight hopefully makes you a more effective communicator with your legislators, and hopefully we get better results. The budget problems, like I said, are not that tax collections are too low. Tax collections are still increasing over last year. The problem is that spending has been increasing too fast. 60% over the last 6 years has been the increase in our government spending in Idaho. That exceeds inflation and population together. So that puts us in this budget pickle. So today, Legislature 201, I want to give you an overview of how the budgeting process works and where and how you can be engaged in it. So here's the Idaho budget process. We'll start with a big word, appropriations. Appropriations is simply, it simply means how much the legislature has authorized an agency to be able to spend. So appropriations is giving out spending authority from our budget. This is the process. This goes from left to right here. And it starts with agency requests, then goes to the governor, then JFAC, and I'll explain each of these in more detail. And let's start with the executive agency requests. The executive branch is the branch of government that includes the governor and all the agencies. And so executive agencies, their leaders are usually appointed by the governor, and they submit their request to the governor. They say, this is how much we want to spend. They try and justify the spending by saying, here's the total information about what's going on in our agency. They give detailed descriptions of particular line items. For example, the Idaho State Police last year asked for a number of new automobiles to replace worn out ones, or just to increase based on a number of additional officers. They also lay out how many new staff they might need, or how many fewer staff that they might need. Now, I say that tongue in cheek because they hardly ever ask for fewer staff or less spending. It's always more. And then their strategic plans for performance and improving, hopefully, efficiency in government. So that's the agency requests. We got those, they come in September, and the governor gets to review those. So from September all the way through the end of the year, the governor has the opportunity to look at those agency requests, and so do the legislators and budget committee members. They get to look at what those recommendations are. But those are merely recommendations, asks by the agencies. The governor then makes his recommendation based on the agency asks and what the governor sees as our potential revenue situation, and has to balance kind of different agency requests with what's available. So he announces this on the first day of the legislative session. That's why this week has been so kind of important, is that to this point, before Monday, no legislators had seen what the governor's recommended budget was. It was released Monday afternoon, and now the legislature gets to start going through agency by agency, hearing from the agencies, and deciding if those recommendations are indeed the best ones. You can see the recommendations from the governor. They'll be printed in the legislative budget book, which is online already, by the way. The legislative budget book, just hold that thought for a second, because I'll come back to it. Okay, I'll do it right now. I don't get a preview screen, so. But the legislative budget book is a detailed description of the governor's recommendations compared to agency requests. It also is a backward look at what we've done in prior years, and especially what was done in the most recent prior year in budgeting. By the way, we're in the current year budgeting. Our fiscal year goes from July 1st through June 30th, so it's not straight up a calendar year. It gives an abbreviated version of the agency requests and provides the backdrop for it. Now, if you're having trouble sleeping lately or whatever in the new year or something, you can pick this book up and start to get into it. It's 851 pages telling you the entire budget and spending situation of the state of Idaho. But that's just the start of the discussion for the legislature to look at these things. Okay. After the governor's made his recommendations, which he did this past Monday, and they've had a chance to start looking at it, the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee is convened. It's called a joint committee because it includes both House and Senate members, 20 members, 10 each from the House and the Senate. And it's the Finance and Appropriations Committee because they're looking at the state finances, deciding how much to appropriate from that. And they are the ones, this committee, meets and decides what kind of recommendations to make to the legislature, to the Senate and House in total, for what the budget should be for the coming year. It says they analyze revenue and state agency budgets. I'm going to give you a little insight. I served on the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee when I was in the House. The amount of analysis compared to how much is being spent and how much responsibility is there, they don't match up. Legislators, they have real jobs too. They have families. They don't have the time to go through this in as much detail as you would think when we're talking about $14 billion of taxpayer money being appropriated throughout the state. They create the appropriation bills that then get voted on. Okay. The budget hearings begin. They're starting them as early as possible this year. It is a primary year. They want to get done as fast as possible. They used to put off all the budget setting. They call it budget setting, but they don't really set the budget. They recommend the budget bills, and then the legislature as a whole votes on it. But the budget hearings are going to be every Friday. Well, they'll do budget hearings, then they'll do the budget setting every Friday. And hopefully it'll move through a little quicker that way. They make votings and revisions and decide what to recommend to the legislature. Okay. The budget hearings are dominated by the Legislative Services Office. Legislative Services Office is an administrative agency here in the state, and it's staffed with state employees, and they prepare the budget information, they prepare the governor's recommendations, they prepare the budget sheets for the committee, and they give an overview of each agency's request. So they dominate the JFAC committee hearings. Legislative Services Office are presenting the budgets for each of these agencies. You might have one employee over a division talking about health and welfare and transportation. You might have another LSO employee who talks about the police and Department of Corrections. And so they each have their specialties, but they are the ones who are presenting to the committee what the agency requests are and what the governor's recommendations are. They do not allow public testimony. And I was shocked when I was in the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee. If you are upset, if you're frustrated by the amount of spending that you see going on in an agency or across the state, you don't have the opportunity to go and voice it in public at the JFAC committee. The JFAC committee also separates into working groups. These working groups can take a little more time and go, for example, through the university budgets or the health and welfare budgets. These working groups are little subgroups of the JFAC committee. They are very careful to make sure that the working groups are 10 members or less, because if you get to be a majority of the JFAC committee, it's subject to open meeting laws. They want to keep these working group meetings in private so that they can hash out all the details. That makes me nervous. I didn't like it as a JFAC working group committee member. I'd rather have the public there to see what we're doing and asking the appropriate questions. And generally, their goal, the JFAC committee, the leaders of the JFAC committee, it seems to me their goal is to make all the budget requests, but they want the committee to run as smooth as possible and look as unanimous as possible. That goal seems to drive a lot of the decision making. They want the working groups to come out with one recommendation. They would like to see the committee vote in unanimity on it. When I was on the JFAC committee, there were two of us that were really operating in a conservative way when we looked at the spending budgets. And so you had a lot of votes on that committee that were 18 ayes and 2 nays. And it's because when I saw waste, I couldn't vote for the budget. And my colleague there, Representative Giddings, she felt the same way. After about 3 days of this, the chairman of the committee called us into the back office and said, "Why you vote no on these budgets?" We said, "Well, there's a lot of government waste in there." And he says, "Well, why don't you propose alternatives?" Number one, we had already proposed alternatives in the working group, and they wouldn't address our concerns. And number two, we said, "Well, if we propose alternatives, will you vote for them? Will you vote with us?" He couldn't make any commitments that way. So we tried it, proposed an alternative, and sure enough, the alternative was 2 ayes and 18 nays. And so proposing alternatives didn't seem to move the needle either. But that is a little insight into how this works. They would rather have a smooth process with very little dissension, at least in public, and then votes that look like the committee is united. Okay. The budget setting, like I said, historically happened at the end of the session, but they are trying to even it out and do more of the budget setting early in the process so that if a budget does happen to get voted down on the floor, they have time to come back and reconsider it. Every time a budget gets defeated, like on the House floor or Senate floor, it doesn't mean that agency doesn't exist anymore. It doesn't mean that they get zero money. And that is one of the misnomers that a lot of people, a lot of legislators say, we have to vote for this because this agency has to run. If a budget bill gets voted down, it just means that JFAC has to go back to work and come up with an alternative that's more pleasing to the members. And so the committee votes on these motions and decide what bills are ultimately going to make it to the House and Senate floor to be considered. In the JFAC committee, if you have the courage to watch it at work, it'll probably take you a couple times to really get what's going on. The LSO agent will make all the recommendations, talk about what the governor's recommendations are, and then show you the motion prepared by the working group. Up to 3 motions are acceptable, but more than one motion doesn't happen very often. More often than not, one motion is made. But if there's more than one motion, somebody offering an alternative budget, like my colleague did a few times, then the second the second motion is recorded, and then up to 3 motions. You can't do 4 motions in the budget committee, but they are then voted on in reverse order. The third motion made is the first one voted on because it's a substitute motion. And once one of them passes, that becomes the motion, that becomes the bill that will be written to be proposed to the legislature. Okay. The JFAC approves the budget proposals, and the budget bills, if you did Legislature 101 last year, the budget bill goes through the same process once it gets to the House and Senate. There's the JFAC committee is kind of considered the first reading, but then there's a day where the bill has to sit there for a second reading. And then the third reading day, the bill can be brought before the House or the Senate to be voted on. And ayes and nays determine whether that budget passes. Budget bills are divided between the 2 chambers. Sometimes the Senate covers some first, and then other times it's the House. And they do that for efficiency, that we can start them and then they cross each other. And that way you're not waiting on the House to do all their work first and then do the Senate. It doesn't matter which chamber they begin in. Okay. Failed legislation, like I said, is sent back to JFAC for revisions. Killing a bill doesn't kill the agency, just gives them a chance to redo it. Little insight on that. Last year, House Bill 443 was a Board of Education budget, and it was included an enhancement of $5.36 million to a $61 million maintenance budget. Need to pause here and talk a little bit about the difference between maintenance and enhancement budget. To make the budget process clearer, about 3 years ago, JFAC changed the way it did things. Instead of having a budget for education that included all the staff salaries, plus a little bit of an increase, plus an increase for inflation, and everything added on top that they wanted to add to their budget, JFAC decided to change the process, and I think for the better, that we will handle current funding plus a little bit of an inflation and salary adjustment separately. That's called a maintenance budget. It just maintains what's going on. Then any additions to that new staff, new programs, new spending, new grants, whatever, anything added on to that would be considered separately in an enhancement budget. And so it made it really easy for legislators to say, look, I want to vote to fund this agency, but I don't want to vote to grow it. And so you can vote for the maintenance budget without voting for the enhancement budget. And so House Bill 443 last year was an enhancement budget. The Board of Education had already had its maintenance budget approved, but this bill was asking for another $5.36 million in enhancements to it, for a 9.5% increase on an already $60 million budget. The bill failed on the House floor, 33 to 37. So it came up, I know it's a difference of 4, but it's really a 3-vote difference. 3 votes had flipped, then it would have passed. So that bill died. The JFAC committee had to reconsider the budget, and sure enough, they did, and they took out the $5 million for the new program that the Board of Education was proposing. And then the bill passed without that $5 million in it. So that's how the budgeting process works. That's how you can be conservative and kill budget increases. You can vote against an enhancement budget and make JFAC either say, all right, there's no enhancements this year, or we can bring it back with more modest enhancements. On the other hand, there was a bill for the state liquor division. It was Senate Bill 1155, and it included $1.5 million in enhancements for improvements, for remodels, for shrink wrap, for computer systems. There was a lot of extra things thrown in that enhancement budget. It failed. It failed in the Senate, and so JFAC reconsidered it. Took out some of those extras, the remodels that could wait another year, took those out and sent the budget bill back to the House and Senate floors. This time it came back as House Bill 1192, and it was for a little bit less than half of what it was, $644,400. But there were still some objectionable things in there. That enhancement was an add-on to what was already the maintenance budget, and it lost. It lost in the House by, I think, 1 vote. It's kind of a fascinating vote. JFAC reconsidered it, and JFAC, they kind of put their foot down on this one. They said they cannot submit the same budget back. If it fails, it fails. That bill is dead. They submitted it back $100 lower. And we're talking the last week of the session. Legislators are tired. Every time they kill a budget bill, it's another 3 days onto the legislative session. They approved it for $100 less. That's how the budget process sometimes works. Sometimes it works in your favor that a budget bill dies and it doesn't come back, or it comes back lower. Sometimes it comes back the same. Legislators get worn down and they end up voting for it. Sometimes legislators don't catch the excesses and budget bills pass. And so the process, knowing the process, being able to watch the process, I think is very important. That's what we do. We have tons of experience in the legislative and budgeting process. We rate the spending bills, and that'll come. That's a little foreshadowing of something come tonight. Okay. All right, so how to read a budget. If you want to venture into this area, it's a wild scene here. So Idaho's fiscal year, like I said, begins, we're in fiscal year 2026 right now. And what that means is starting on July 1st, 2025 was the first day of fiscal year 2026. It ends on June 30th, 2026. And then the next day, fiscal year 2027 starts. The fiscal year gets its name from the end of its budgeting year. In reading the budget book, it provides an overview of the entire budget and the asks for the agencies and what the governor recommends. There's a lot of valuable information in there. You not only see what they're recommending to increase in number terms, they give short explanations of what they're asking for. It allows us to compare how that agency has changed over time and how it compares to other agencies. Cool. Okay. The agency budgets themselves provide the detail that I was talking about, and they try and give justifications for why they're asking for supplements or why they're asking for new cars. One time it was the state troopers, they were asking for 5 drones and a new staff position as a pilot to pilot those drones. I didn't even know we called them pilots, but that's what they are. And so there was the explanation of why that was needed, why it was so important. One time they asked for a helicopter too, a whole helicopter with a facility to house it. Okay. All right, so here's what it looks like. I don't know if I get to, I don't get to control anything on the screen. So anyway, I will describe it. The top line here shows the appropriation that's current right now, the original appropriation that the legislature decided on in the last legislative session ending in early April last year, decided the budget for fiscal year 2026. And for the entire state, it ended at $14,101,000. That's that top line, far right. That's what was appropriated, not requested, actually appropriated and voted on. The FTP is full-time positions, full-time equivalent positions. That's how many staff, how many employees there are. So you can see there's 21,000 state employees. Gen is the general fund. That is the state budget that comes from your income tax dollars, your sales tax dollars, and a few fees that get thrown in there. Dedicated funds are also state dollars that come from dedicated fees, dedicated taxes, like taxes on the lottery, like fees for the state parks. They are dedicated for particular purposes. And then the federal funds is the money that we are taking from the federal government that are filtering through the state government here. So you can see that of all the spending there, a shocking amount of it is coming from the federal government. 39% of the state budget is from the federal government. Now, I don't know what you think about state sovereignty, but when you're asking mom and dad for 39% of your spending, are you really free? Yeah, they might loan you the car, but not the gas, right? So I think that is a big sovereignty question. Are we going to rely on the federal government for a large portion of our spending? Okay, and then moving down this table here, you can see there's adjustments made to the reappropriation before we get to the fiscal year 2027 base, which is the starting point for their budget considerations. Reappropriations, supplementals, rescissions, deficiency warrants, and cash transfers and adjustments are all the adjustments made after the fiscal year 2026 appropriations have been made. So sometimes money is reappropriated and said, hey, we authorized to spend it in 26, didn't get spent, we're reauthorizing to spend it next year. We are, supplementals are, hey, an agency went over its budget. It needs more money. They had expenses they didn't anticipate. The legislature can approve those or reject those, but these are the requests here. Deficiency warrants, sometimes things like fire suppression is more expensive than thought, and so it's not that the agency overspent, it's just that the agency was overused, and so the spending happened. And cash and transfer and adjustments, sometimes moving it between accounts. That gets you to the fiscal year total appropriation, what was actually approved to be spent by votes. Executive carry forward, again, is carry forward spending authority, and that adds to this. And expenditure adjustments, sometimes the governor might say, hey, we need to roll back spending by 3%. And so say you need to adjust your spending down. And so that gets you to the estimated expenditures. And then before we start the fiscal year 2027, a baseline to start from makes sense. You know, where are we going to start with these budgets? Removing one-time expenditures. In 2026, a lot of the spending items that were in there were just for 2026. We shouldn't consider those as being part of 2027. It was a one-time expenditure on a particular program. And so those one-time expenditures are taken out from the calculation before we get to the base of fiscal year 2027 being $13,420. $13,420,000 is the baseline of where we start. Now, if I was doing a budget and if I was running a state, I'm a little nervous about starting with where we ended last time after adjustments, because it assumes that government is right-sized already and that any excessive growth of prior years just gets compounded this year. I'd rather go to zero-based budgeting, which says agencies have to justify all of their budget and start from zero and tell us what amount of total money they need and why, and justify it. But this fiscal year 27 base budgeting says that after all those adjustments to 26, here's where we start from, and that's the size government is now. Now we get to add to it. And so the next few lines there, benefit costs and whatnot, are inflation adjustments. They are adjustments to benefits that welfare recipients get based on inflation. They are whatever amount of raises in employee compensation that the legislature might decide. And that gets us to the program maintenance. And when we talk about program maintenance, we're saying that this is the base budget plus inflation and moderate employee pay increases. And that's funding that amount. They consider that as maintaining the agencies. Then beyond that, down the green line below, I'm sorry, we flipped screens. That's good. Thank you. Below program maintenance, it lists the agencies again, lists a lot of other add-ons. These are all the enhancements that agencies and the governor is recommending to add to our budget. And it's millions, it's over $1 billion when you add that in there, going from, well, we went from 13,420 and now we're at 14,373. It looks like I'm a numbers wonk, and kind of some inaccuracies drive me nuts, but it shows a 1.9% increase. Do y'all see that in the bottom right-hand corner? 1.9% increase, because they are comparing this 14,373 to the 14,101, which was last year's total appropriation. But what it ignores is that last year's appropriation was added on to and adjusted, and one time was taken out and all that stuff. And the base that we're starting from was a lot lower than that. And so 1.9% is an increase over last year, but it is hiding the fact that we're starting actually from 13,420, not 14,101. If the legislature did nothing and just funded government at its minimal level, 13,420 would be the budget. I think that percent increase ought to be compared to 14,373, the very bottom one, to the 13,420, and then you're looking at something like, 8% increase. Did you get an 8% increase last year? I didn't get an 8% increase last year. This budget says government should get an 8% increase. Whew. We didn't have an 8% increase in employment or in population, nor in inflation. But that's what the recommendation is here for the entire state budget. Okay, so do we get to look at an individual budget now? Oh, before I go away from the state budget, that full-time equivalent positions column is important to look at too. When I was on the JFAC committee, it wasn't just about the money, it was also about the employment, kind of the scope of government in Idaho. So going from 21,379 employees and going all the way down, there's some add-ons in terms of additional state employees they want. And so in that bottom of the yellow column there are the added employment positions. And do we have the bottom? Can we click to the next one? Oh, we don't have the bottom one, but at the bottom, it will sum them up and tell you how many hundreds of employees that the budget is recommending for the state. Okay, so that is an overview of how to read the state budget. I don't know how many of you are going to go do that, but we'll certainly write some articles and give you some data and show you how that works. But that's where it comes from. We're not making these things up. That's how the process works. And if I am implying that the system is set up to grow, it is, because the way they do the calculations, the way they present this, and the way the motions are presented is that there's always an assumption that we need to add on to budgets. There's very little assumption about agencies ever being too big or needing to be pared down. The budget legislation, whenever I looked at a budget, the text of the bill is very confusing and wonky. But this is called the Statement of Purpose and Fiscal Note, and it summarizes what the statutory language of the appropriations is. And this is very good. It's very easy to read because the fiscal note includes what this bill is adding, both in terms of employment and in terms of enhancements. And so you can see this bill is proposing $642,000 of new spending, and that's a 5.7% increase. And you, as a legislator, you can decide, does this make sense to add that much spending, 5.7%, to this agency for those reasons? And that's how you can look at a bill and decide whether it deserves a vote or not. Okay. The bill text breaks it down in terms of federal, general, and dedicated funds. I guess those are interesting, especially when you want to control your reliance on federal dollars. It caps FTPs, which means that if an agency gets an increase of 12 FTPs, they're capped. The total amount of employment they have has been raised by 12. Even if they don't fill those positions, the agency still gets the money for those positions. Even if they don't fill those positions, the agency still gets the money. And that is built up over time in some agencies. Our budget specialist, Brett, he's pointing out that they're kind of operating like little slush funds across the state. And so it's fascinating that we're funding jobs that are not filled and the agencies have the money. Okay. That's right. All right. And at the end of the legislative session, this is getting to the end of my budget talk, the report, legislative fiscal report, will show all the budgets that have passed, what the appropriation is for the coming year, and provides a detailed fiscal summary of the current position of the state and where we're expected to be at the end of the next fiscal year. So come April, you can read this fiscal report and it'll tell you what's supposed to happen all the way through next June 30th and where the state should be at the end of that period. And hopefully if they do their job right, they do their job better, we have less spending in the state, we have tax cuts, and then we have a more lean state budget. All right, so I think that's it for do I have any more budget slides? Okay, now for me tonight, the fun stuff is to talk about what IFF does with some of this information and for you. The Idaho Spending Index is relatively new. We've been doing this for about 6 years now. The spending index, what we do is we take a set of metrics and we look at each of these spending bills so you don't have to. And we look at the bills and decide, is this a good spending plan or is it not? And so let me get to my discussion on this. Okay, we've done about 8 pages. I've got 20 more to go. I'm just joking. Okay, we're getting toward the end of my comments, and then we can open it up for questions. But the overview of the spending and freedom indexes are this. The spending index helps voters know how their legislators vote. We have a set of 8 metrics to judge spending bills. So we go through, does this include wasteful spending? Does it rely on federal funds too much? Does it grow the government through the addition of new objectionable permanent employees? We have 8 metrics that we're pretty objective about. We can just look at a budget. Does it yes or no or whatever? And the bill gets a rating of -2 or +1. If the bill is rated a -2, that means it's a good budget bill that has cut something and has not added excessive spending. Excuse me. If it's a -2, it means it's adding too much spending, adding too much employment. If it's a minus, it means it's adding excess. I just said that again. If it's a plus, it means it's cutting spending, cutting employment, cutting something like that. So it's kind of reversed in your thinking, even though I can't say it very well. So positively rated spending bills are ones that are conservative budgets. Negatively rated spending bills are ones that are growing the budget too much. When legislators vote, if they vote yes on the positive budget bills, the ones that are trimming government, then their spending index score goes up. If they vote against good bills, then their score goes down. If they're voting for too much spending, they'll get a lower spending index score. We rate the bills based on this objective set of standards. Legislators grade themselves based on their votes, and I can't stress that enough. If you have a legislator says, "Oh, they're just grading me bad," no, we didn't grade a single legislator. We rated bills; they determined their score. And if they have a problem with their legislative rating, they should be telling us, all right, which of our metrics is wrong? Which bill did we get the rating wrong on? Because we don't determine what the legislator's score is. Like I told my economics classes, I taught economics for 25 years. I would like everyone to get an A. I would like all of our legislators to get an A. All of our legislators getting an A on the spending index would mean that government spending went down. You'd have more money in your wallets because your taxes would be lower, and we would have a more conservative state. Let's get a bunch of A-rated legislators, shall we? I'm not going to read all the metrics, but they're available on our website. And did we have slides on all the metrics? Okay, so you can see all the spending index metrics. That is not the only index that we do, however. We also do a freedom index. A freedom index we've been doing for over a decade now. I think we started in 2012 on this. And we have a set of 14 freedom metrics. Is it constitutional? Does it grow government? Does it compete with the private sector? Does it make something part of government that used to be part of the private sector? 14 metrics. Oh, does it protect families and children? Does it lead to more economic freedom and more school choice? 14 metrics. We simply rate the bills that way. If it is a freedom bill, it'll probably be rated positively, tick positive on a few of those metrics. If it's a bill that grows government and hurts families, it's probably going to have a negative rating because it ticked negative on a few of those metrics. Again, we rate the bills based on these clearly defined metrics. We're very transparent about it. Here are the bills. Here are the metrics ahead of time. We rate the bills before the legislators vote on them. That we don't go and rate the bills after the fact and try and manipulate the results. We rate the bills because part of doing this index isn't just to see how legislators vote. Maybe it's to influence the outcomes of the legislature. If a bill is negatively rated, then it has a lower likelihood of passing because some legislators see that rating and understand that there must be some bad things in that bill. The rating gives an indication of what that bill is doing. Legislators don't have time to read every bill, but they do have time to at least look at a rating to give them an indication. Maybe this is a bill they should look a little closer at. What are those negatives? Or what are those positives? Why is this bill so good? The rating gives them at least some guidance into look for it. And I'll tell you this too. Not only do we get more bad bills killed and more good bills passed because of this, I think we get legislators who are more engaged. Sometimes we get better legislators because if you have a bad freedom score, some districts do not tolerate legislators who are not voting conservatively. So over time, I think we've gotten better legislators. And I think we get better legislation as well. Just this week, I was in an agency department's main office, the chief of that department, and they were talking to us about a bill that they wanted to propose this legislative session. Told us the details of the bill, what it would do, what it wouldn't do, and asked us what we thought of it. And just looking at it, we told them, just preliminarily looking at it, this isn't official or anything, it's probably looking like it would be negatively rated. The agency head then asked us, what could we do to make this bill better, to get it to neutral or positive? What changes could we make? And we made some recommendations. And I'm telling you, that is something that is not seen in the work we do in the Freedom Index, is that people come to us, ask us about their legislation, they want it rated positively, and so they will take bad things out, they will put good things in, and you'll get a better bill from it because of this Freedom Index process. The Idaho Freedom Index, I didn't create it. It was created before I got here, but it is time tested. It is the gold standard of rating legislation, and for you to know, at least have an idea of how your legislators are actually voting. Okay, let's keep going. I may have said a lot of this. Oh, can we go to the graph? What I want to say, what I want to say on that last slide is here on this graph. Here is the 6-year history, just looking back 6 years on the Freedom Index scores and the Spending Index scores. And this is in the handout you have. If you have one of these, it's available on the back table too. And it shows the outcomes of the Spending Index aggregated across the House and Senate. And so here it is too, for the folks at home. The green line on top is the average score of House members, representatives in the House of, in the legislature. The red line just below that is the Senate scores. And so you can see, first of all, it's not smooth and stable. Different legislative sessions are different from one another. Different legislative sessions have different legislators sometimes. Every other legislative session is an election year. So the even years, sometimes you get different results than the odd years. Big surprise there, right? And so the good news for this last year was that both the House and Senate freedom scores went up. Isn't that great news? It's great news. The bad news is that we're still below 68%. That's a D plus in my econ classes. We could do better on our legislative voting there. Even worse, the bottom two lines, the yellow one is the Spending Index score for the House members, all 70 of them. And then the purple line at the very bottom is the Spending Index score for the Senate, all 35 of them averaged together. The Senate used to really suck, if I can say that word. But they bumped up their game in the last couple of years, and they're kind of even with the House. And so I guess the Senate improved a little bit, but they're at 37, 38%. They're bouncing around that area. In other words, 62% of the time, they're voting the wrong way on budget bills. They're voting for excess spending on budget bills, on average, 62% of the time. Some legislators have a 0 Spending Index score, meaning they voted for every bad budget bill. They voted for increased spending every single time. Some legislators have in the high 90s, meaning they voted for fiscal restraint 90 some odd percent of the time. And so the Spending Index score gives you an indication of what kind of a legislator you have. Again, we publish these ratings before the votes are even done. And looking at the Spending Index scores compared to the Freedom scores, I would point this out. The Freedom Index scores, I think, are higher because, you know, Idaho is a red state. I think that people in Idaho want conservative outcomes. It's sad that we're only getting that 68% of the time, but at least we are, you know, we're working towards some freedom bills. The spending bills, I think, is still with that mindset that whatever the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee recommends, we ought to approve because they're doing all the work and analyzing the budgets. We need to trust them. Do you trust a budget process that works the way I described tonight? Don't answer that. I don't fully trust it. That's why I'm in the job I'm at. And that's why we hire good people to do this analyzation and check out the budgets, check out what's being spent, look at it historically, look at the reasons why and where we're at, and what we can predict in terms of where our spending is headed. And we've been ringing the alarm bell. Our spending was out of control for the last 6 years. Taxes should be cut. And you say, well, how can you cut taxes in a year where spending is exceeding revenues? You do it by cutting spending. You don't make the households pay twice. They're already paying high taxes and you want to tax them more because you couldn't control your spending. That's not how a conservative state operates. The legislature this last session convened a DOGE committee, Department of Government Efficiency, trying to look through all of Idaho government and figure out where some savings could be made. I was happy to report that just a few days into the convening of that committee, they asked us at the Idaho Freedom Foundation what we would recommend. No problem. We recommended $2.1 billion of cuts from a $14 billion budget. Now that's significant in my view, but I think we could have even done more. But we recommended what we thought they could realistically do, $2.1 billion worth of cuts. And if they did that, there would be plenty of room to repeal the grocery tax and get us on a path to either getting rid of income taxes altogether, like Mississippi is doing, or to get rid of property taxes altogether, like Florida is proposing. Either one of those would be great wins in my book. And so we have proposals to do that, and it's based on our knowledge and our analysis of budgets. We can have a government that operates and meets the people's needs, being constrained to its proper and limited role, and not have a property tax and not have a grocery tax. It's possible. We're working toward it, and we're working with legislators to hopefully get it done. Idaho should lead out on this. We could be the first state in the nation where you can actually own your home and not rent it from government. Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. That's where we're headed. Is that my last slide? Okay, that's it. So I've talked a lot. I feel like an economics professor again. So hopefully you could track with at least some of that. We're open to questions all the time. Please email me if you have questions. Reach out to me, call me. But we have some time for question and answer right now. So if you want to ask a question, I just ask that you come up to the mic so that the folks at home can see this. Hello, folks at home. And so that they can get the question heard and be happy to answer them. So the time is yours.
Doesn't North Dakota have no property tax?
I'm not aware of North Dakota not having a property tax. I don't know. I'll research that one.
I've always heard, and then they're the only state in the black. And then they have a state bank that loans money without interest to construction or something like that.
Wow, that would be amazing. I'll look at North Dakota. I just heard that when Florida was proposing a property tax repeal, I thought I heard them say that Florida would be the first in the nation. But if North Dakota is already there, maybe they never had it to begin with.
I'm not wrong.
So I'll check it out. I'll check it out. Thank you for that. I like your sweatshirt. Hello.
Hello. My question, I think, is more of a one-on-one question.
Okay.
Which is, as an individual citizen who's interested in testifying, how often I found that there's only like a half day's notice that they're going to be taking testimony on a particular bill.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to get more advanced notice of upcoming?
You know, I think that's a perfectly reasonable ask, but the House and Senate set their own rules for noticing their meetings. Typical open meeting laws say that you have to have 24 hours notice. And in some other cases of other certain meetings, it's a week notice. But I would suggest if you want that change, and I would agree with it, I think it's outrageous to post an agenda for a meeting at 7 p.m. for a 9 a.m. meeting the next morning. There's no way that people with lives that are working and raising kids have time to check out the agendas every night and then be ready to jump in the next morning to go and testify on a bill that's important to them. I think that would be a good change. I'd like to, let's talk to legislators and see if they would pass a statute that says all meeting agendas for legislative activities have to be posted 48 hours in advance. At least that would give us notice to get people here. And notice one other aspect of that. If meetings are noticed less than 24 hours in advance and people want to get engaged, what people are more likely to be engaged in the process? Probably the ones with a tight radius around the Capitol, right? So you're getting a disproportionate view of what Idahoans think when only those around the Capitol are the ones that have the time to come and speak. When the ones in Bear Lake County or up in Border County, or Boundary County, sorry. They don't have the time to get down here the next day. And so you get a distorted view of what the people of Idaho think if you only have Ada County coming to speak. Yes, sir.
So another one-on-one question. Suppose we had a governor who proposed cutting 4% of every department, percent of the budget of every budget.
Yeah.
Where would that die?
Where would that proposal die?
Yes.
If the governor proposed that, I would say it would die at the very next step. The JFAC committee would probably look at that and go, oh, can't do that to the teachers. Oh, the Department of Water is too important to do that. But do you know what happened when the revenue projections came out lower than expected in August? The governor said, we need to do a 3% holdback on all agency budgets except education, which is about half the budget, by the way. So he said 3% holdback, which is implying that these agencies making up half of all government spending in Idaho had 3% over capacity. If they're able to cut back and we don't feel it, well, where'd that 3% come from? I think there is excess capacity in a lot of ways. But you're right, if it got proposed, the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee has found it difficult to truly cut budgets. Yep. Hello.
Hi, so I have attempted at least on 2 occasions to go in and see the JFAC in person.
Yep.
And so I went and I tapped on the door and I said, I'd like to come in and witness as the public. And I noticed that all of the seats were taken by government officials that were there to present, and there was not a single seat for the public to come and witness. And I was told that I could go to the room behind where they have screens where they don't have to look me in the eyeballs and I could be in another room and just watch it. So my question though is, you were saying once it passes from JFAC, it goes to the floor. It does not go then to another committee, right? So if the
True.
House has an education committee, that bill doesn't go to the House committee. It just goes straight to the floor to all of them.
Exactly right.
Oh, okay.
The committee is where the first reading happens,
And the
the
committee is where
JFAC is the
the
first reading. Yep.
The committee is where the testimony usually happens, but since it bypasses the
You're exactly right.
committees and it goes right to the House floor or the Senate floor, it bypasses the public part of it.
You're exactly right, that there is no opportunity for the public to testify on these budget bills. And it's a frustrating thing. And I'm sorry you weren't able to get a seat. Our analyst goes over there every morning to be in there. And the first 2 mornings, he had to stand in the back because you're right. All the agency officials and LSO staff, they were occupying all the seats. You know, if they're truly working for the public, I would like to see the public have those seats, but apparently you have to get there 15 or 20 minutes early to get a seat. So it's not like, it's not a rock concert, but sometimes it feels that way, right? Okay. Yes.
Yeah, I was wondering why they insist upon throwing more and more money in the education department when the test scores are so terrible and they've been that way for years.
Great question. Just in case that didn't get picked up, she's asking about so much money being put towards education when the test scores haven't reflected any additional, any fruits of that spending. The governor in his State of the State address just the other day said that he was proud that since he's taken office, the education spending has increased by 70%. Okay. When he took office, math and reading proficiency scores for 3rd to 8th graders was at about 30 to 32%. So that means 1/3 of 3rd to 8th graders are proficient at reading and math. But now, years later, after he's increased spending on education by 70%, those math and reading proficiency scores are between 30 and 32%. They haven't changed. They've been stagnant. Adding more money to public education has not improved public education. I'll make this prediction. I think what is going to improve public education, notice I said public education, is private school choice. And that is that if parents have a choice to send their kids to what they think is a better educational fit for their kids without having to pay double for it by getting an education tax credit off their income responsibilities, then they will choose the best options. That will have two effects. Kids will get better education in those better options. Three effects. Households won't have to be spending as much money to get those good results, and public education will improve, or they'll see more and more kids leave their schools. Where it's been tried, it has had exactly these effects. The public or the private school choice has led to improvement in the students who exercise it and the students who stay in public schools. And public schools are often a good fit for families. I'm not saying public schools are horrible. I'm just saying that those who think that public schools are working well for them, there are A-level students, there are great students coming out of public schools. They can exercise that choice and stay with the public schools. But those who find their kids struggling and it's not a good fit, they can look at other options. And both sets of students find that their experience improves. Thank you.
My question is along the same lines. You earlier said that almost half of our budget is education. Is that a large percentage anyway?
Yeah, from the state share of the budget, you know, the $6 billion, it's 62%.
Wow.
Yep.
So don't property taxes pay for the public schools?
Property taxes pay for facilities and operations. The state spends a great deal of money, over $3 billion on public education, on K-12.
Okay.
Yep.
So
They pay for the teachers, the administrators, the curriculum
does.
costs, the state does. Yep.
outside of property,
Yep. Mhm.
that comes from the general fund or whatever it is?
Correct.
Okay.
You nailed it. Uh-huh.
Well, what mystifies me is there are only so many teachers. They've got a lot of bureaucracy. And
They
apparently, okay, they've got a lot of money in state budget, so that's the influence, I guess.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out why we can't get rid of public schools and start private schools, which, as you just said in the previous person.
I'm glad.
Where's the political, it's the money of?
Yeah. A lot of the increased spending, I'm not saying all of it, but a lot of it goes to administration. There's far more administrators in schools than when I was a kid. There's far more counselors and additional staff compared to teachers. And so I think that's where a lot of it goes. But I'm glad you asked this question because we have a tool to help parents analyze this. If you go to the idahofreedom.org website, you can go to the education tab and look at our IPSAM map, our IPSAM, or it used to be called, is it changed? We officially changed the name? Yeah, it is up. And it's the Idaho Public Schools Accountability Map. You can click on your district, you can see scores, you can see spending, you can see how much your superintendent is paid, you can see all sorts of accountability measures for how your schools are doing. And you can compare it to other districts, surrounding districts, and see if it's working for you. Thank you. Yes.
I have been saying for years that it's a PSYOPs word. Public schools is government schools. And in the 60s, I'm a child of the 60s. I went to a private school. We were way ahead than the public schools, even in the 60s. And then Alex Newman of the New American, he has a good speech on the communist beginnings of our public education, the John Dewey, who was a communist, and that's why they're so expensive. It's communism.
True. Yeah, and you can see I stand corrected. They are government schools. Unfortunately, whenever you talk about trimming that down or making adjustments to the government school system, the argument in the legislature is it's in our Idaho Constitution that Idaho shall provide a uniform, thorough, and general system of common public schools, local common schools. And so constitutionally, we have to provide the system, but it doesn't mean we have to provide, it doesn't mean every kid has to be in the government schools. So it does not exclude the possibility of private education and school choice. It's perfectly fine. But I think you're right that over time, because they are government schools, they are biased towards the Marxist ideologies, the woke ideologies, and for promoting government and not promoting free enterprise. And so I think we've seen those effects. I went and did interviews at a Pride festival and asked folks there if they would be okay if the 10 Commandments were in schools. They said, no, they're not religious indoctrination centers. They're for education. Then I asked the follow-up question, would you be okay with pride flags in the schools? They said, yeah, no problem. Yeah. And that was the experience at a Pride festival. And I'm like, they don't see the indoctrination, or they don't see it as indoctrination, see it as perfectly normal. But I think a lot of other folks on the other side would go, you know what, that is indoctrination. And this is why we're frustrated with our public education system. Is so many times we get sidetracked by what is woke or politically expedient instead of academic excellence. School choice restores us to a focus on academic excellence, and that's what we want for our kids. Yes.
Hey, thanks for taking my question.
Sure.
I guess this is more based on like an analysis standpoint.
Mhm.
As we see in the news, there's obviously a state in our great nation that has a lot of fraud going on. And a simple analysis year over year would have seen an increase in spending in certain programs.
Yes.
Is that done on our budget level? Are we analyzing year over year spending to kind of pinpoint possible areas of fraud?
Great question. There is an agency or department in Idaho government called the Office of Performance Evaluation. And legislators or others can ask for an evaluation of a particular department or program. And the only hiccup I have with that is you have a government agency evaluating government agencies, and do we expect to get really objective results from that? And so we do have those controls in place, although I don't know how strong the effect is of those kind of evaluations. But then we have other places like the Idaho Freedom Foundation. And I'll tell you what, we put up a local government accountability page, and we're also doing state government accountability. And we just put up the link that said, hey, if you have information about waste, fraud, or abuse in government, please let us know. And within just a few weeks, we had 200 accounts there. And so there is a lot of work to do in that area. And we're trying to do that work. And so we exposed the problem with the child care grants that the legislature voted them down. When I was in the legislature, we voted against it. We didn't need to spend another $5-6 million on programs that we showed involved woke ideology. So it failed. But then the Department of Health and Welfare had a few agents of theirs decide that they were going to go around what the legislator did and reappropriated money from other areas in the Department of Health and Welfare to fund those programs anyway. We exposed it. The director of the Department of Health and Welfare left, and those programs didn't get funded after all. So we need a lot more like us. We need a lot more time and resources to be able to do that, but we're on top of it. Right now, I'm collecting a list of daycare centers, and I will go and visit them and ask them how many kids they have. I will have the information already of how much money they're getting paid, and we can see if A equals B or not. Yep. Thank you. All right. I think that's about time for all the time we have. I appreciate you coming. This is a new thing we're trying this year, 6 p.m. on Thursdays, because folks couldn't make it during the day last time. So we'll see how it keeps going. Please keep coming. Ask your friends to come. Next week we have a good lineup. I think we're this close to having Raul Labrador commit to be here next week to talk about his work on the protecting women's spaces, especially in athletics. And so it'd be great to have him here, and we have a great lineup for the rest of the session. We'll keep you posted. Get on our website, get on our Facebook, X page, Instagram, and you can be up to date on everything we're doing. Thank you for coming, folks.
you're on top of it.